Definitions of ugly. We didn't go with the stereotypical one, but ugly is a part of the process, honestly. I mean, if you know anything about what Bricks does, he's done St. Alban's, Leon's, Jack Rudy Cocktail Company, so many other things, all these beautiful products, but I can promise you that there are some ugly parts of those stages. The beginning creative process is not always pretty. I mean, in Charleston, we're a beautiful city, but it hasn't always been this way. I mean, if y'all were here last month, raise your hand if you were here at Library Society for Edward Hart last month. What? A couple of you. He said that he grew up here in Charleston, born and raised, and he said growing up, it was not at all like this. He said like a beautiful decaying city, which is a beautiful place, but honestly, there was a lot of ugly parts, and there still are. I mean, like right there on Calhoun and King Street, it's like not too pretty with all that construction and everything, but it's cool to see where we get. So, Brooks definitely knows all about that. I mean, he is a man that starts projects. When I was writing his bio for our website, I was like, wait, wait, not that too, right? Like, not also that coffee company, not also like Condé Nast writer, right? Like, no, yeah, totally. He's a ridiculous man and is really talented, and he knows some stuff about ugly. So I'm gonna let him take over now.
Thank you. I'm assuming everyone in here probably listened to the Serial podcast. Every time I see MailChimp, it's mail key. Really, really honored to be here. Very flattered when Sophie reached out to me to ask me to be a part of this program. It's really a spectacular thing for Charleston. I remember watching Sid Mashburn talk at a CreativeMornings in Atlanta a couple years ago, thinking, what a cool thing they do. I didn't know that it was a nationwide or worldwide program, but I'm very honored to be here today, and I think we should all be so excited that you guys have worked so hard to make this a reality. So today, I'm going to talk about embracing ugly. I was going to memorize this whole thing, then a good friend of mine asked me a couple days ago to go to Miami for his bachelor party, and this kind of took a back seat. So I'm going to read from my notes that I prepared. So today I'm going to take a look at the design and development of two recent projects in downtown Charleston, Leon's and St. Alban. Both projects are particularly germane to today's theme for several reasons. First, we took over spaces that were quite neglected and required a lot of vision to transform. And with all due respect to their prior lives, they were, you could say, ugly. And second, the end result of each both feel a little weathered and worn. So I want to talk today about embracing ugly and how we renovated these spaces on our little block by doing so. So before I dig into our creative process, I wanted to share with you how our projects have been received by the public. I hope that you're all here today because you've found the projects interesting or you've engaged with them in a meaningful way. But for a broader snapshot, I scoured Yelp to get a sense of what other folks had to say about our design work. And it's quite fantastic to say the least. First up is St. Alban, our all-day cafe and coffee shop that is about 3 weeks old. And these are all real quotes. Did I just step into a hip and swanky Brooklyn, New York hipster restaurant? In the key of played-out Brooklyn hipster. And it looks like every neighborhood coffee place in Brooklyn. Next is our flagship, Leon's, which is just a block up the street from St. Alban. What did they have to say about that? A hipster fish club with rustic decor. When you walk in, you'd think it belongs in Brooklyn, super hipster. And just another hipster joint. So contrary to what Yelp might think, we did not choose hipster as our design voice. And to be honest, I'm not even sure what that means. Instead, we've developed an approach all of our own. But I think it bears resemblance to and owes a debt to design philosophies that existed before we began our projects. The old school design philosophy that you could compare it to is wabi-sabi, which is a comprehensive Japanese worldview or aesthetic centered on the acceptance of transience and imperfection. We have these dinner plates at home that are round dinner plates, hand spun by a woman in Seattle, and they're circular, but sort of the beautiful imperfection on the exterior is what sort of I respond to. And that we try to kind of introduce in our projects. The new school version, which was coined by an architecture and design firm called Avrico, is defined as best ugly. And they say it represents all things that are beautiful and charming in an offbeat, sometimes awkward manner. And our version, for our firm Neighborhood, which my partner Tim and I created to kind of house our design work, is amusing antique. I totally made that up about 12 hours ago. That's not something we've necessarily talked about, but it is kind of the overarching view of how we approach these projects. And it's design driven by our goal of creating laughter or entertainment, and our goal of creating a sense of history, layers, and timelessness. So using that as our base, let's get into our projects. So how did Leon's go down? First, we had a space, a large parcel on Upper King Street that sat abandoned for about 6 years and likely more. In hindsight, it was a great decision, but it could have gone terribly wrong. I'm sure many people wondered about this location in the early stages, and more than one basically asked, why buy an ugly building in a desolate part of town? And our reasons were price. With real estate skyrocketing in Charleston, the only real deals to be had are in these quote-unquote transitional areas. Space, we had an entire parcel front to back on King Street stretching to H Street. So not only did we get Leon's, but we got the Charleston single behind it, as well as a decent amount of real estate that we're working on turning into a private event space. Parking, obviously, is hard to come by in Charleston. We had street parking, we had a lot up the street that we were able to rent from a church, and just generally there was a lot more space to park. Charleston's rate of change. So at the rate that Charleston is developing, it's pretty much a guarantee on King Street. If you buy a property that's cheap and run down and in a weird part of town for some people, within a year or two, you'll probably find yourself in the heart of the action. And then influencing the development of a neighborhood. It was exciting for us to get to say, let's go where no one else is and really kind of drive some development here, bring people up this way and revitalize this area and give the people in the neighborhood, of which I'm one of those residents, a place to go that they don't have to travel into downtown Charleston to get to. And then there was a sense of built-in history for that building in particular. So once we had the building, we started asking the important questions that would guide us through the conceptualization of a restaurant. There were some undeniably important elements at play, like the history. Leon's had been a paint and auto body shop that served countless Charlestonians for many years. And dozens of people, and that's Leon, that's on our opening night. He and his family still live here in town, just very close to Leon's. Dozens of people emerged with recollections on having their cars serviced there. Leon and his family still live nearby, and we wanted to stay true to that shared history and continue the tradition of going to Leon's for a new generation of people. So we asked ourselves, how can we embrace that history but update it for a new generation? How can we serve the community with something they need and want and will use? And the answer that we formulated was, we need a restaurant experience that is classic, comfortable, accessible, familiar, and fun. So, what food fits the bill? And the first food that came to mind was oysters. Why oysters? Because Charleston is an oyster town. There's an oyster culture here. Oyster roasts are part of our culture, and people gather over oysters. And we also drew a lot of inspiration from New Orleans. Here in Charleston, we have a lot of oyster shops. I've worked in some of them before, but they skew a little bit higher end, kind of to the French brasserie sort of experience. But in New Orleans, the oyster joints are very working class. It's everyman. You might go and sit next to the mayor, and there might be a blue-collar worker sitting next to him. So we didn't want to be pigeonholed as a raw bar, however. So we looked at what might be a nice companion to oyster. And the obvious answer, of course, was fried chicken. Why fried chicken? Because it's quintessentially Southern. It has a grandma factor and nostalgia that makes everyone love it. And then Charleston has some great spots for fried chicken, but you can't enjoy beer or wine in them, and they don't offer many healthy options for balance. So that took us to our third element, the healthy element of Leon's. So the healthy options provide a reason to go daily for lunch or dinner. And then the fried chicken gives you that opportunity to cheat if you'd like it. So allows us to build more regulars. So how do we take all of that, the history and the food, and put it into a place that looks like this? It's one big concrete room, essentially, with no real infrastructure to support a living, breathing, busy, functioning restaurant. First, we started with the name. We tossed around a ton of names, but after really driving through downtown Charleston, it becomes clear that there's a dying hand-painted sign culture. There was actually a great article written about it in the city paper a couple years ago that was really fascinating, but especially on our side of town, there are people who have been hand-painting signs for years, and you're starting to see that disappear. So we really wanted to embrace that, especially because this building was so important for the neighborhood. So here's David Boatwright changing our sign. We kept the Leon's intact. He just kind of updated it a touch, and we changed paint. So before it said Leon's Paint and Leon's Paint and Body Shop. So we changed it to Leon's Fine Poultry and Oyster Shop. And where it says Foreign and American Beers, it used to say Foreign and American Cars. Then we built walls for the kitchen, designed and built a bar, added plumbing where it was needed, and began to outfit the space to house the most basic functional elements a restaurant required. And at that point, we had a very rough concrete box with a few walls and a bar made of concrete blocks. And then we stood around and had our pictures taken inside. We began sourcing objects and pieces that we believed could bring some warmth to the space. We began most often with the lighting. Old lights are cooler, they're cheaper, and rarely will someone else have them. The pendants that hang through the restaurant right here used to hang in the Hardee's that was on Marion Square or off of Marion Square years ago. It immediately gave the space a sense of history, even more so when you know the backstory. Most of our other lights came from two other sources that we purchased from, or from the internet. We spend a lot of time scouring the dark alleys of eBay for the right fit, and those are some of the old lights. We buy these things totally broken down, and what a lot of people don't realize is you can rewire a light for very little money. So we'll find a light that somebody's basically giving away, take it to a company, they'll rewire it, and we have a beautiful functioning light for very little money. And our general lighting plan for Leon's and St. Alban is cram that shit full of lights and make sure everything's on a dimmer. So once the lighting goes in, it looks a lot like this. And after that, we think of seating patterns. In what is essentially a big square room, you can create a drama. You can create drama in that room by a variety of seating. You've got different heights, groupings, table sizes, communal opportunities, private secluded seats, bar seats, and kitchen counter seats to catch a view of the action. We took some old stools and had them reupholstered, which you can see to the right. And these are the dining room chairs when we found them in an old place in Chicago covered in dust. Once we played around with the seats, you can begin to get a sense of the space that you have for your customers and your employees to move. So next we began to think about the art on the walls. With all the downlighting, what is being illuminated if not a blank stucco wall? The first pieces that we put in place and that began to dictate the tone of the place were these black and white photographs from a friend of ours named Chris Porche West. He's a photographer that lives in New Orleans and has for many years kind of chronicled New Orleans life. And he spent a lifetime taking photos of musicians, artists, oystermen, and New Orleans personalities. We chose these pieces because they show the working class layer of oyster culture in America. And because they were black and white, they immediately evoked a sense of history, as if we bought oysters from these guys for years. Finally, there was an element of amusement for us. We have the tiny picture of the little Budweisers on ice, if you've ever seen that. There's the picture of the oysterman with a shotgun in his lap right there. And there was an element of absurdity that we found charming. And once they were in place, it looked like this. Here you see the salon wall over our banquette. As we started to think of ways to soften the space, we thought we should create a more intimate space for groups of two. It began as a conversation driven by our own amusement. Could we create a row of 4 or 5 tables that was over the top in how nice it was? We wanted to put down a rug, put tablecloths on the tables, and hang old oil paintings on the wall, like a pocket of intense sophistication in this very rough concrete space. Over time, we scaled that idea back, but we kept the salon wall with pieces we purchased from all over. This is what it looks like today. The piece on the far left was from one of our brick masons who found it in an old home he was working on at the time. Again, there was a sense of reuse and a kind of built-in history. In the end, we abandoned the tablecloths and the fully upholstered banquette, but I think this little row has something special for date night. This is one of my favorite pieces in the restaurant. It was commissioned for the project and painted by David Boatwright. The backstory is basically when Tim and I went to New Orleans to do some R&D for the property, we were having a beer in a bar at the French Quarter, and somebody had been playing some songs on the jukebox. And the song came on from Ernie K. Doe, who is a famous New Orleans singer, called Mother-in-Law. And it had this very kind of great, whimsical tone. And as we were drinking beers and having great ideas, we both agreed this is really the tone that we want, the way this song feels is how we want Leon's to feel. So when we got back home, we were having coffee. We texted David Boatwright. He rode his bicycle over. We told him the idea, and he was like, yeah, sounds good. So he went down to the space. We chose where it would go, and a couple weeks later, he brought us this piece. The quick story, Mr. Monogama Hyde is what Ernie K. Doe changed his name to after he went a little crazy. And the reason he went crazy is money and women, which you can see in the top and right. And these two little pieces are also just kind of fully realize our own desire for amusement in our projects. That is a jean jacket with foghorn leghorn that we had framed. And we literally chose the ugliest mat we could possibly find. And then on the right, that's certainly not ugly, but that's a really more kind of just an amusing piece. We had an old piece of slate, and Becca Barnett was doing a lot of work for us, so we said, hey Becca, do you want to paint some stuff on this slate? We don't care what it is. And this is what she gave us. It's kind of like tattooed iconography. So once the art has been hung, the seating finalized. One second here. There we go. Once the art has been hung, seating finalized, the chairs selected, you get to move in to what is arguably the most fun part, the set dressing. We basically outfit the rest of the space with pieces that give a sense of time passing, of many years lived in the space, and things that might warm it up. Framed pictures, additional signage, mirrors, and pictures of scantily clad women in the men's restrooms. Some decisions were based solely on necessity, and others out of sheer amusement. So just some of the little things that you could begin to add. That's an old ship's horn. That's our soft-serve sign. Then you cram all that stuff into one space, shake it up, make sure the light's dim, and you get this. That's a few days before we open. That's after we opened. And this, and hopefully this, people gathering together. That's Leon's. So, let's talk about St. Alban. How did St. Alban go? So, our offices are across the street from Leon's. One day we look out the window and literally we see this sign up on the window. It went up that day. We called them about 15 minutes later. We were inside checking out the space, and the next day we signed the lease. So then immediately we went into, before we even thought what will work here, we signed the lease. Then we started thinking, okay, well, how do we actually turn this into something cool? And we had to now think in terms of the context of developing a block. We had to exist next to Leon's and service a neighborhood. We wanted to supplement, not cannibalize Leon's for our customers, and we wanted to make the experience different enough to give people a reason to visit both businesses rather than have to make a choice. The good thing is the building was mostly a blank slate, which gave us a lot of creative license. There had been a business there before, but the primary focus was renting equipment to off-site events. So we weren't competing with built-in memories of customers or really any spatial limitations. The place didn't even have a front door, so we were able to get creative. Because of the size of the place and the need in that area, we immediately thought coffee shop. Why? Because nearly everyone drinks coffee. If you have a coffee shop, you can become a part of someone's routine. And in the restaurant business, building regulars is the secret to longevity. And nothing builds regulars, I've learned, like coffee. It brings activity to the block in the early morning hours. There was a need for coffee on this part of King Street. And I didn't have to pay for coffee anymore. As we began to dig into the economics of coffee, however, it became clear that it's tough to make money on coffee if you aren't roasting it, and if you aren't supplementing it with food that you're preparing from scratch. And as my partner Tim says, if you ain't making money in this business, it's just a lot of hard work, and that's true. So that led us to the next element of our project, all-day food. This gives someone a reason to visit other than coffee. It becomes a meeting place for the neighborhood. Food allowed us to become more than a coffee shop and become a cafe. And the most important I didn't have to pay for breakfast. And finally, since people would be around all day, and if, like me, you require a lunch beer from time to time, we added beer and wine. This allowed us to monetize the space at all hours of operation, since people don't drink much coffee after 5. Conceptually, it allowed us to take a direction in this European-style cafe. And again, the most important thing, I didn't have to pay for drinks anymore. So I'm saving a lot of money here. So how do we take all that, wrap it up nice, and put it in a place that looks like a killer's secret hideout? Well, like Leon's, we started with the name. We wanted to choose a name that was sort of weird enough that people wouldn't necessarily understand driving by what we did, which sounds probably like a bad business decision, but this name is much better than the original name we were considering, which was Chateau Ned. So again, we wanted to keep the hand-painted sign because that was, you know, an important part of the culture of where we were. This I've always loved at Zappos next door, Leon's sign, of course, and that's also Zappos, and that little lightning bolt is just the most amazing thing. So then, like Leon's, we started with the space. Since we didn't even have a front door or windows, we got some. Inside, we cut for plumbing and began to plot the location of the bar, the interior walls, and the bathrooms. And then as the design for St. Alban became a little bit more maximalist, the build-out was actually more intense than Leon's in many ways. Into the front space here, we installed large reclaimed factory windows that we purchased from an old factory in Chicago. So those are the windows that are there now. That's what they looked like when we bought them. And miraculously, they fit perfectly after we had them bent back to shape. They literally did. We turned them on their side, and the hole we had cut was perfect. Then we had our flooring installed. To create that immediate sense of history, we very stupidly purchased a lot of old train car beds. They were thick, hard to work with, nearly impossible to lay, and hard to keep clean. But anyone who's been in St. Alban can attest, they are stunning. And a lot of people are like, oh my God, I had no idea these floors were here. But they were not. And you can see in the left, they were super thick. So we lost a lot of height as well in installing these floors. And finally, we installed a door. We had purchased a very old, beautiful metal door, and we had a custom frame built to hold it. That is what you see being installed here. Next up was our lighting plan. Like Leon's, we wanted to have a variety of light sources: high, low, pendant, sconce, museum lighting, task lighting, and exposed bulbs, enough to create a starry effect at all hours. We also had to cram all that shit onto dimmers. Our departure for this project was the use of some very modern lighting as well. For us, it gave the sense that the place had been there forever and had simply changed with the tastes of each owner. Perhaps someone had inherited the cafe from their grandmother and installed the lights they loved when they took over the space. The seating patterns at St. Alban were a little easier since we knew the European cafe was our departure point. Most cafes we loved practiced the fit as many tables and chairs as you can school of thought, so we did just that. We wanted the entire front room to feel like one big group, so we kept the tables the same height, the same size, and packed them close together, unlike what we did at Leon's. We went on several buying trips to find the right collection of chairs. We wanted different colors, and we wanted them worn in. New chairs would not work for St. Alban with what it was becoming. And then after seating, we moved into art. As at Leon's, the first pieces we purchased were black and white photographs of life in Eastern Europe. The pieces are beautiful and immediately gave a sense of history to the place. And we also scoured Etsy for a bunch of nude figure drawings. And perhaps the most striking element of art in the place are the walls, both of which took a shocking amount of time and energy to get right. On the right, you see our back room, which we wallpapered in a really beautiful print from a storied English wall covering company. And we looked at an aggressive amount of samples, but we knew we wanted it with green and red, as those had become kind of our most prominent colors of the project. The bare walls themselves to the left are even more impressive. They are the work of Suzanne Allen, who owns Wall Candy, a high-end commercial and residential finisher, for lack of a just description. When we took the space over, there was actually a beautiful bare wall when you walked in that had been there that was patinaed in a really beautiful way, not unlike that back wall there. Of course, being the jackasses that we are, we covered that up with wallpaper, and we told Suzanne we wanted her to recreate the way that wall looked on the new walls, which she did perfectly. So that is, the work of Suzanne Allen there. And finally, the set dressing. The wallpaper was up, the chairs were in, the art was in place, and now the exciting part was selecting the pieces that would reinforce that feeling of time passing, of old equipment rendered useless, and display cases from defunct bakeries still in use. And then I call this slide displaying ordinary things in a really cute manner. Then you cram all that stuff into one space, shake it up, make sure the light's dim, and you get this, and this, and hopefully this, people gathering. Thank you.
We'll leave in just a little bit, but if anyone has any questions for Brooks before we go, please ask away.
So what's next?
We actually, if you're familiar with that part of town, there's a space on the corner of King and Race Street, and our offices are on the second floor. And we're going to open a restaurant below that. We're kind of working through the concept right now.
Where did you get the espresso sign with that?
That was from an old architectural salvage store in Maine. And it came from somewhere in Eastern Europe. I'm not sure where, because it's spelled incorrectly.
How do you find that stuff? Like the old lights that people are throwing out that you rewire?
Really traveling a lot and going to antique stores, or we have two resources that we use a lot of. There's a woman that we buy a lot of things from in Chicago, and she has 3 huge warehouses in a very sketchy part of town. And the business began as a prop rental business for movies, and eventually grew into they just sold the stuff because they got so many things. And it's the kind of place where if you say, like, I want to design a taxidermist office in 1920s Prague, you can go there and they'll have everything to create. So,
Is that next?
it's in the works.
Okay, good.
How do you finance all this and find investors?
That's a great question. We borrow a lot of money from the bank, and we put up our own personal capital. So fortunately, my partner owned several restaurants before, and I had a company that had proven to be successful, so sort of put those things up as collateral, and the bank will loan you some money. Pray it all works.
Anyone else?
Why did you decide to do all the writing in your own handwriting?
That was because that was really just kind of selfishly. I like to draw, so I just wanted to have the opportunity to handwrite all that stuff, and I think it gave it a sense of imperfection and a little bit of that ugly that we talk about.
But I was just going to ask if you found yourself liking one space more than the other.
When we opened St. Alban, I was really like, this is more of a human scale, and this is really for me, I think. This is where I want to spend all my time. And then after spending 3 weeks there, opening the place and going back down to Leon's for the first time in weeks, and the fire was lit in the back, and the music was perfect, and the lights were dim, I sort of fell in love with it all over again. So, no, I love both spaces, and really they were places that I wanted to hang out in, but didn't necessarily exist. I mean, I love a lot of restaurants in town and try to support sort of the whole community, but there was something missing that I personally wanted, and I think in that kind of, when you open a business like that, I think you really just hope and pray that other people will feel the same.
So you didn't talk about Jack Rudy, so I'm curious where that fits in with St. Alban and Leon's and your current or future endeavors that you're going to take on.
Yeah.
What happens with that business?
Well, I run that completely separately, so I'm not involved with anyone. That's my personal company. So that I run in the morning and in the evening before I go into the restaurants. And I also have a business partner who's a family member that helps me run that business. And we've got a young guy who works for us who has worked for us now for about 2 years, who really kind of runs the day-to-day shipping and receiving and the website orders and all this kinds of things. So fortunately, I feel very fortunate because I get a lot of credit, but there's a whole team of people It's not me running this business alone or me running these restaurants or even conceptualizing these restaurants individually. It's definitely a team effort. It just so happens that my partner hates the public eye, so I get to absorb most of the credit.
What would you do differently about this space?
Not a thing.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, it is.
Okay, one more.
How do you see your responsibility in nurturing that up-and-coming neighborhood and all of the businesses that are going to be started there in the next 2 years? How is what you've done going to impact that, and what's your responsibility in it?
Well, I think our responsibility, which we get knocked sometimes for, I think it becomes really important, is price. And we've tried our best, and I really think we succeeded in offering really a lot of value for your money. So you can go anywhere and get a sandwich in town, and maybe a sandwich at Leon's is $1 more than another place you might be able to go, or $5 more than what you can get at Burger King. But I think with that, you get local people who've been hired, trained, cultivated. You get an experience of of music and design and kind of a full package. So I don't know. Our responsibility, I think, to the neighborhood and the community at large is offering kind of a real, true, honest service, priced fairly and cooked and served with a certain amount of love. And I think as long as we do that, I'm not necessarily worried about sort of anything else. I think it will all fall in line if we're providing kind of a fair service to the community and the neighborhood around us. Thank you guys so much.